Hi, and thank you for your interest in our work. I'm Benjamin, and I'm going to talk to you about Capricorn, our constellation-based multi-robot place recognition method.
One of the key challenges of multi-robot SLAM is place recognition. In such a task, the robotic team navigates around the environment, and robots will encounter places that they judge to be interesting. Using their sensors, they will extract information about the environment and will share a representation of it to other members of the team. Relying on this shared information, other robots will try to detect if they have encountered the same place earlier. This will allow to compute inter-robot loop closures to align their respective maps and contribute to consistent global SLAM estimates. The information being shared has to be sent through a communication channel. As such, it is critical that the representation used is compact and can be efficiently shared. It must also be representative to allow for good place recognition. While thinking about which representation could be a good choice, we put ourselves in this situation. How would we describe this place to someone on a paid phone? Our intuition was to say that there is a desk and two chairs, both of them in front of the desk. There is a globe sitting on a box that is itself on the top left of the desk. There are 4 bottles next to the globe and 3 to the right of the box, and so on for distinctive elements we could see. This idea led to the approach we are now presenting. The core idea behind our work is that relying on semantic and spatial information, we should be able to describe complex environments with meaningful representations requiring little data. This is particularly interesting when considering the challenges of a multi-robot setting. The ability of generating such a representation is made feasible thanks to semantic extraction capabilities of deep learning approaches. We now have accurate and robust tools to find semantic regions from images, and we can adapt them to various semantic entities if given the appropriate data. Following these thoughts, we propose to rely on constellations of objects for place recognition. In order to generate such a representation from an image, the first step is to extract semantic regions from it. This can be in the form of 2D bounding boxes with an object detector, for example. Then, each semantic entity must be associated to a single 3D point. This can be done by making use of RGBD data, for example, but what we are really interested in is the final representation. We believe that it is an interesting choice for multi-robot place recognition. It remains very descriptive of the environment while presenting several advantages over traditional visual features. Points of the constellation directly represent high-level features with objects instead of more local and smaller-scale visual features. They also require only a 3D position with a semantic label, as opposed to key points with high-dimensional descriptors. The number of points used is also much lower, since we only have 1 point per semantic entity. For constellations to be used in place recognition, we need solutions to describe and compare them, so that we can quantify how similar they are. We propose to do so using descriptors, the first one being a semantic descriptor of the full constellation. This descriptor is very simple. It can be obtained by simply counting the number of instances of each class. For example, in the first constellation here, we have 6 bottles illustrated in orange, which means that the bottle index of the descriptor will contain the value 6. With 2 constellations, we can compare their semantic descriptors using a semantic score. This score is inspired by the Jacquard index, or intersection over union. It can be computed by assuming the best case scenario of matching instances of objects of the same label between both constellations. Doing so, we can count how many common objects instances appear and divide that number by the total number of instances to get a score between 0 and 1 representing a perfect semantic match. For example, the first constellation has 6 bottles and the second has 4 bottles. In the best case scenario, 4 of these bottles are the same instances, and 6 bottles are present in total. Using this over each class, we get the final score. The semantic score only takes into account information about what kind of objects are in the constellation, but does not make use of the spatial information, which is very important to distinguish constellations. This aspect is taken into account by using the geometric surrounding descriptor that is computed for each point of the constellation. To generate this descriptor for one specific point, the closest instance of each class has to be considered. The Euclidean distance between this instance and the point of interest can then be stored at the class index of the descriptor. Storing this information for every class appearing in the constellation leads to the geometric surrounding descriptor. In this example, the closest bottle is 0.12 meters away from the point of interest, and the closest mug, in blue, is 2.38 meters away. Because this descriptor is based on Euclidean distances, it remains invariant to viewpoint changes. Moreover, relying on the closest instances of other objects makes this descriptor more robust to constellations that do not overlap perfectly. When comparing two constellations, the geometric surrounding descriptor can be computed for each point of each constellation. We can then find points of the same label that have similar surroundings by looking at the distance between their geometric surrounding descriptors. If this distance is small enough, it indicates that both points potentially match the same object instance. Considering all the matches obtained between both constellations, this can give us an idea of how well they match geometrically. This can be quantified with a geometric score, representing the ratio of number of matched objects over the potential maximum number of matches, just considering the semantic labels. Combining the semantic and geometric score, we can obtain a constellation comparison score containing information about both the semantic and the spatial consistency of both constellations. This is the final score that we can use for place recognition decisions. To validate that this representation is well suited to the challenges of multi-robot SLAM, we use it in a decentralized mechanism and experiment with it in a fully connected robotic team. As each robot navigates the environment, it will generate the constellations of objects based on sensor data it collects. For each constellation, it can directly extract the corresponding semantic descriptor. To then query efficiently and in a scalable way the full team, we use a decentralization mechanism inspired by previous work. We can split the possible classes and preassign a subset of them to each robot. To start a place recognition query, a robot, R4 in this example, will send the relevant parts of the semantic descriptor to robots responsible for the classes that appear. Over time, these robots have accumulated all queries concerning these specific classes, and are able to respond to the querying robot with information about which robots might have seen similar subsemantic descriptors earlier in time. The querying robot will gather all responses and be able to decide whether or not it should send the full constellation to other specific robots that seem to have encountered consistent semantic descriptors earlier in time. The receiving robot, R3 in this example, will be able to compute the full constellation comparison scores between the queried constellation and the ones it has generated itself earlier, and reply with a place recognition decision. To evaluate our solution, we implement it using the YOLO v3 object detector pre-trained with the COCO dataset as our semantic extraction method. The 3D point approximation of one object is found by using the median 3D position from RGBD data within the detected bounding box of the object. The classes are split among robots by consecutive IDs as a first simple experiment. We performed experiments using one sequence of the Freiburg RGBD SLAM dataset recorded in an office-like environment. A multi-robot setting was simulated by splitting the trajectory of the sequence into up to 20 robots. Since no ground truth was available for place recognition evaluation, we computed ground truth scores by relying on known camera poses and hand-labeled positions of obstacles blocking the field of view. We first looked at the place recognition performance obtained with constellations. In red, we show the precision recall curve of our approach in a centralized setting, in which constellations of every robot can be directly compared one to another. In blue, we can see how the quality of place recognition decisions is affected by the decentralization mechanism. There is a drop that can be explained by the first filtering made in the decentralized case. This first filtering relies on subsets of semantic descriptors only and can cause to miss out on some valid matches. Both curves still illustrate good performance with high AUCs at similar levels as our baseline, a NetVAD-based visual descriptor that is the state-of-the-art for place recognition, but that is not as interpretable as our approach. This seems to indicate that in the type of indoor environment considered, constellations of objects are a good way to recognize places accurately. One of the key advantages of our method that we want to verify is how little data is required to recognize places. To observe this, we look at how the size of one place recognition query is affected by the number of robots in the team in the graph on the right. Without the decentralization mechanism, the size would not scale well with the number of robots, as shown by the black line. Our decentralized solution, in red, only requires about 500 bytes of data for a team-wide query, regardless of the number of robots. This is on par with other state-of-the-art results relying on less interpretable net-flat-based descriptors, which present other benefits and disadvantages compared to our approach. Thank you for your attention and interest into our work.